Okay, well, welcome back. David Kirkpatrick here, this time with Tito Jankowski, who is co-founder and CEO of AirMiners. That's an amazing organization, a community of entrepreneurs, scientists, and investors committed to scalable carbon removal solutions. We just heard from Bill Gross a lot about the importance of carbon capture and carbon removal. We're going to learn a lot more about that now. I'm not going to give Tito's full bio. I'm sure he'll tell us a lot in his talk. He'll talk for a couple minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so, then I'll resume a little questions with him. So Tito, please tell us about what you're doing with carbon removal and what AirMiners is and how we should be believing in that prospects for the future there.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here, David. Thanks for having me on. Look, bottom line, anybody that's working on net zero or carbon neutral, whenever you see net zero or carbon neutral, think carbon removal. There's always going to be some level of residual emissions that a net zero entity or a carbon neutral entity will have to account for and have to remove. And so, every one of those climate goals already has carbon removal as an opportunity built into it. So I'm going to get into what we do, but just wanted to give that as the background, following up from Bill's talk. So let's get my share here going. So my name is Tito. I'm the CEO of AirMiners. It's great to be here. I'm going to cover some more about why do we need to remove carbon from the sky? What are carbon offsets? How does that fit in? How is carbon removal an opportunity for investors? And how is carbon dioxide getting removed from the atmosphere? And just for a little bit of context, AirMiners is a accelerator, a community, a fund towards removing 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by 2030. We've accelerated 166 companies. They've raised $130 million, and we're backed by the Breakthrough Energy, Grantham Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Energy. So just to give you some context about where that's all coming from the top. So why do we need to suck carbon dioxide from the sky? Really, it comes down to there was an updated model in 2018 from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it was really a big shift in our lifetimes of our understanding of climate. It went from the decarbonization alone is, well, that's all we need to do, right? We need to just reduce emissions. And in 2018, there was a shift where all the models pointed towards, we still need to reduce emissions for sure, but we also have to take pollution that's in the sky, we have to take it out. And so the model was updated that carbon removal was necessary. And then, in the next 4 years, you had $500 million of venture capital pouring into the field. You had billions of dollars of corporate commitments coming in to really align with the latest in the climate science. To give you a graph for it, the white line here is business as usual. This is us continuing to increase emissions overall. That red line that's decarbonization only. So that's like we go all out on reducing emissions, wind, solar, nuclear, making things more efficient, all of that. That red line doesn't get us to the orange line, which is 2 degrees of warming. And so that's really where we're aiming at for a stable climate, 2 degrees of warming, and the green line, which is 1.5 degrees of warming. So the gap between the red line and the orange line, that's really the opportunity for carbon removal, or the need for carbon removal from a climate perspective. That adds up to, from the IPCC models, looking like 10 billion tons per year of carbon dioxide that need to be removed every year in 2050 and beyond. And so if you do the math, 10 billion tons per year times what Bloomberg is modeling at $100 a ton, that's $1 trillion per year opportunity. That's that gap between the red line and the orange line. So I want to dive more into kind of how the companies are doing this and why. So how are the companies making money? There are existing compliance markets for carbon offsets. So that's different than carbon removal. That's for the decarbonization piece of the equation. But there are existing markets, hundreds of billions of dollars, like the EU ETS, emission trading scheme, and that's really where the long vision for carbon removal is coming in. Is let's tie it into these existing markets. The EU is setting up to be able to add carbon removal into those markets, as is the U.S. government, which is purchasing $35 million of carbon removal credits this year. Now, where is the market more about today? That is, there's a $1 billion commitment by a group called Frontier that's made up of Stripe and Shopify. These companies are investing in carbon removal, or they're buying carbon removal credits in a way because it's an opportunity for their business. Companies like Stripe and Shopify that are part of the Frontier group they're building infrastructure for a world where every purchase has carbon accounting happening right when you hit buy. So they're building out APIs and storefronts for millions of purchases. So as a bit of background, that's what's driving some of these commitments. Mitsubishi, for example, committed $800 million to carbon removal. They see it as an opportunity to lead infrastructure development for this future trillion-dollar industry. Of course, BCG and McKinsey are also buying carbon removal credits, and that's to help lead the consulting stack for every Fortune 500 company that's going to need to buy carbon removal credits. So that's a bit about where the market is today. We also have venture capital coming in because of that opportunity. So the Lower Carbon Capital Fund's a $350 million fund. You also have Counteract, Carbon Removal Partners, Amazon are also investing in this opportunity. All these companies are really making money on pulling carbon from the sky. They're doing other valuable things, making other valuable products. Some of them are doing just credits, and some of them are doing both. Here's a couple examples. To start with, if you're not familiar with carbon removal, this is it's really about how do we take carbon dioxide gas that's in the sky, how do we take it out? It's invisible. There's actually not all that much as a percentage of the atmosphere that's carbon dioxide. So you have to sort through a lot of air to grab onto it. Here's a company called Carbon Minerals. The background is rocks are good sponges for carbon. They soak up carbon dioxide just sitting there. And so what happens, if you want to speed that up, you can grind up the rock, turn it into a powder. And that's what companies like Carbon Minerals are doing, is you can speed up this process of making these carbon sponges work that much faster. Now, there's other ways of removing carbon. There's things that involve farming and plants. There's things that involve machines and processes. But that's a first example of a company. This is Takachar. They take what comes off of farms after you harvest the crop. Everything that's left over, if it's left to rot, the carbon dioxide comes back out. The carbon dioxide that's captured by the plants originally gets let back out. So Takachar has a process to turn that into solid carbon that doesn't come back out. It gets batted back into the soil. That's called biochar. There's another company called Charm that they're taking that same what's left over from farming, they're turning it into a bio oil that then you can put back underground and store it. So it's another way of using plants to remove carbon dioxide much faster. There's a similar company, but based in the ocean. It's called Rubisco. They're taking algae blooms and seaweed blooms that end up on the beach. They're harvesting that, and rather than it rotting, they're saying, hey, let's clean up the beach and let's remove the carbon and turn into solid carbon that they can add to building materials to make stronger cement. Aquatic is another company that's working in the ocean using a mineralization or an electrochemical process to capture carbon dioxide. And then, of course, there's Climeworks and Carbon Engineering, which people might have heard of. These are vacuum machines for sucking carbon dioxide from the sky and then storing the carbon dioxide underground. This is a facility in Iceland that's been covered in the news, where you can take direct air capture carbon and then store it underground. I mentioned another company, but here's Carbon Built and Carbon Cure, taking carbon dioxide and putting it into building materials and cements. These companies, when we're talking about carbon removal, they're selling for a wide range of pricings, but that's in the sense that this is an early market working on figuring out how the pricing works, anywhere from $50 a ton to a couple $100 a ton. All of this comes down to, when you think net zero, there's carbon removal as part of that, even if it's not yet accounted for. That's what gets us to that 10 billion tons needed per year, $100 a ton, $1 trillion industry by 2050. Just going to cover a bit about AirMiners real quick. What Y Combinator did for the internet, AirMiners is doing for carbon removal. We have a startup accelerator program. We've boosted 166 companies. They've raised $130 million. We do online events where we get experts in the field to come share what they're working on. We recently launched our first fund, We made 20 investments over the last year. This was covered in Politico about the 20 investments that we're doing. We also have a partnership with Shopify that came in and purchased carbon from every single company. The way we're doing the investments is it's a revenue sharing structure. And so that was a nice compliment to have somebody come in as a customer. These are the 20 companies from all over the world, all different types of carbon removal that I talked about today. Those are all covered in our portfolio. We do educational programs. If you want to learn more about carbon removal, you can come to our AirMiners Boot Up. It's a free 6-week introduction. And we also have an introduction for corporate sustainability leaders who understand how to make carbon removal as part of their net zero goals that they already have. And that's a buyer's academy that we run. So if you're investing or interested in investing in carbon removal, I'd love to share what we've built with our the 20 companies we've already invested in, and the 166 companies and more that we're accelerating through our program. So thanks for the opportunity to share that. And my email here is tito@airminers.com.
Thank you so much, Tito. Really fantastic what you're doing. I'm very excited. I actually would like to learn more, possibly offline at some point, but let me learn a little more online right now. First of all, I think you say that your goal is to facilitate the removal of 1 billion tons a year by all of your collective actions. Is that correct at AirMiners?
It's 1 billion tons cumulatively by 2030. So we really want to get the engineering, get the scale up going so that we get that amount removed.
So obviously, if 10 billion tons a year have to be removed by 2050, that's a very important contribution, but this is a really, really big global project that is necessary, as Bill was describing earlier. And I know you perhaps heard me challenging him on, what's the likelihood that this industry can get on that same kind of cost curve that we've seen for solar, wind, batteries, and now EVs, and much of that driven by China. I'm just curious, your big picture view about the prospect for that kind of massive increase in capability here.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at the global spending that's happened for large infrastructure projects or large global problems. I mean, so for example, in the final years of World War II, the U.S. government was spending 40% of its GDP on the war. Those types of numbers are, when we talk about a $1 trillion industry coming up over the next 26 years, that's the type of investment that we're going to see needed to going after carbon removal. It's why companies like Mitsubishi, Stripe, Shopify, Microsoft are already purchasing carbon and investing in carbon, because they're seeing this as an opportunity and they want to be first.
So like Bill, you see this as a massive investment opportunity and a giant economic trend in itself that will be enormously positive for people who participate.
Absolutely. I was talking to a Canadian billionaire a couple of weeks ago, and he just said carbon removal is necessary. So therefore, it's in the sense that it's required. It's a required piece of the climate puzzle. It's currently not really well covered, right? If you've invested in solar, you've invested in batteries, you've invested in wind. All those things are at least somewhat well invested in. Carbon removal is a huge opportunity to get in at the ground floor of a recently discovered to be necessary piece of the climate puzzle.
And of course, it's not just the sheer removal in itself. There's also the utilization of it. So CCUS, and also removing it from the smokestacks of coal plants and other heavy polluters. And I do think that one of the points you made earlier is really seldom understood by people, that there is no way, and the IPCC has made this very clear, that the world is going to achieve its climate goals without significantly increasing the role of carbon capture. But I mentioned that and reiterate it to ask you a slightly difficult question, because that for many people in the environmental community, there is an intrinsic resistance to this. Even there was a letter sent a few years ago, I'm sure you're painfully aware, which they called carbon capture per se an illicit corporate scheme. And that was, the Sunrise Movement and others. So are you still encountering that? Do you see that waning? Is there still just a resistance to this and the idea that it's a get out of jail free card for the fossil fuels?
So one of the things I really want to differentiate is that there is a difference between carbon capture, which is capturing from smokestacks and emission sources, and carbon removal. Carbon capture is best thought of as that's a decarbonization technology. That's a technology to reduce the emissions coming out of a process. So if you're running a manufacturing plant, it's putting carbon dioxide out into the air, well, then capturing the carbon at the point source, that decarbonizes the process. That reduces the footprint of the process. Carbon removal is needed in addition to all the work going on in decarbonization. So it's not really a question of, it's I think a lot of the resistance might come down to how we're going about doing it. But from a climate perspective, from a climate model perspective, carbon removal, which is net taking carbon out of the sky that's already there, it's necessary. It's necessary. And so the question then is, well, how do we go about doing it? It's not really a question of do we do it or not. If carbon removal doesn't work, we don't have a way to get to 1.5 degrees as stable, and we don't have a way to get to 2 degrees stably. And so it really is a question of how do we get there? And it has to be with carbon removal.
Yeah. Well, I think another thing a lot of people are just beginning to understand is that it isn't just, as you say, these giant wind-sucking machines, but this mineralization opportunity seems to be getting more and more excitement around the world. You mentioned several companies. I'm not sure if your slides included it, but as I was prepping for this, I saw you're very excited about the use of these minerals in sewage treatment, because it's sort of a way of getting the carbon out before it emits, into the atmosphere. So talk a little bit about the opportunity of mineralization. You did have slides about it, but there are certain kinds of minerals that have an extraordinary potential to sequester carbon.
Yeah, the example would be a company called Crew Carbon. They are taking the industrial wastewater treatment process. They're changing it so that it lowers the cost of that treatment process, and it removes carbon dioxide at the same time. So that's something where you have the environmental benefit and you have the process benefit at the same exact time. And so that's a great example of using minerals to remove carbon. It's also a great example of just different ways to remove carbon. 2018 came around. Climate model says we need this. There's a $1 trillion industry on the horizon. How we get there, minerals, machines, farming practices, all of those things are under the umbrella of how the heck do we take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and do it fast?
Right. And so up to now, most of what AirMiners has done is really just facilitate the creation of the ecosystem. But now you're really starting to help direct capital into these companies, which is very exciting. I think we're running low on time, but I would encourage people to use that email that you offered to the world here, to Tito at AirMiners, to really pursue more with you. I think we need more investment in this area. We need a lot more understanding of the critical role of carbon removal. So thank you so much for this incredible work you're doing, Tito.
Great to be here. Thank you, David.
All right. Well, next up, we have David Solomon talking to us electric vehicles. I'll be back with you in just a moment.